A man chooses, a slave obeys.
Welcome to the Ethics in Video Games podcast, where we explore issues at the intersection of ethics and video games.
What follows is a series of graphic, interactive scenes that we can't show you.
All right, Andy. So kids they're the classic vulnerable population. And we've talked about this idea of vulnerable population before, right? So the idea is, right, they may not be competent, right, to make decisions in their best interest, right? Which is
we assume that they are not, right?
Right. We limit what they can do in many ways. And we normally think that, hey, look, parents are there, and the job of a parent is kind of to make the decisions for them until they're old enough to really understand what's going on and make their own decisions. So what does that mean in video games, right? So the whole point is we stop kids from doing things because there might be harm. So what kind of harms are we even talking about in video games? So I was thinking of four. Right, and maybe you want to add to these. Maybe that there's, certain kinds of violence. I'm thinking of the kind of violence you might gain in a game like Manhunt, right, which is kind of this really hardcore violence. Maybe they might disturb child psychology, right?
Sure, or make them more susceptible to violence, to committing acts of violence of their own, or.
Though notice, even if it doesn't, maybe it might really bother them in some other way, right?
Right, it could give them nightmares or.
Yeah. Or whatever it would be, right? And honestly,
make
I
them
don't
anxious in some way. Yeah, sure. We can imagine all kinds of ways that this might affect the kid's mind, because the kids' minds are malleable. They're still learning. They're still figuring out how the world works.
Right. Okay. So second one is so exposure to sexual themes. And notice I'm saying sexual themes, it's not really about sex for me, though it could also be about sex, but harmful beliefs about sex. So I'm thinking, let's say about, raping games and stuff like that.
Sure.
Right. They could develop harmful beliefs about sex, about their bodies, like in the plastic surgery game, and maybe about consent or how to treat their partners.
That's right. But this is one of those topics where there's this huge grayscale in the middle, right? There are a lot of hand-wringing goes on about what kind of sex is okay, what kind of sexual things that kids should be allowed to see.
Right. Yeah.
And some of it seems quite ridiculous on its surface, but people feel very strongly about this.
As a parent, it's very hard to judge.
There was something in the news just recently about some women getting very upset about a lesbian couple kissing in a pool. Because there were kids nearby.
Right.
And so that ends up being just a way to bash lesbians, for a kind of relationship you don't approve of.
Right. Though in many parts of the world, that is kind of specifically the idea. I mean, that's why you don't have those kinds of characters, let's say, in games in China.
Right.
Right. Because they're considered, to potentially be too risque for kids, even though, let's say, it's not illegal to be a lesbian.
Right.
But these other things also, this idea about, their bodies. Right, how to think about your body, and this idea about treating your partners. Right, the lessons about sex relations that you might get from games. Notice those are very, those are things that are, as you said, really hard to. It's really hard to draw this very strict line, very clear line of what's appropriate for kids and for kids of what ages.
Right.
Okay, then we have stuff that we've talked about before, which is the excessive gaming stuff. Right? If you get addicted, if you end up playing too much, right, that can mess up other parts of your life. It could, mess up your school, physical activity, lead to family conflict. And
it's interesting, too, because you're a parent, right? So if you bought a toy for your kid that became his favorite toy and he played with it all the time,
right,
it wouldn't bother you. You'd be kind of psyched that you found, oh my gosh, I found the perfect toy for my kid.
It all depends. It all depends on what the toy does. right?
Okay.
And I think the same would be, but it also depends on how much the toy was interfering with the rest of my kid's life,
Hmm.
right?
Oh, true.
Uh,
Yeah, like if he couldn't he couldn't pay attention in school because he just wanted to play with the toy.
right, right. So that's at that point, or we had family conflicts all the time, right,
Hmm.
about it, right? Uh, okay, and then finally the financial harms, right?
Right.
So anything having to do with money is obviously potentially dangerous for the kids and to the family.
Right. We assume that kids don't understand money until they're older and until they've started to get a sense of what a dollar is worth.
Right. And just like everything else, because kids are all different, some kids understand money fairly well, what some kids don't understand it at all.
Right.
Right. Okay. So this is the kind of concern here. So what's when people talk about lazy parenting, like Andy,
Hmm.
what's your image of like lazy parenting? What's that supposed to be?
You know, that's I don't know if I have a good answer for that because I tend to be on the side of the parents. I tend to fall on the side of parents. I'm not a parent myself, but boy, a lot of my friends are parents, and I see how much effort and how much work it is to raise a kid. And so I tend to be pretty lenient about what lazy parenting is. I guess lazy parenting is when I see somebody in a public place allowing their kid to to be to run amok or be otherwise antisocial in a public place, I expect more from parents. And if I'm not getting it, then I probably assume that they're just lazy parents.
Sure. Oh man, but before I had kids, I used to judge people all the time on their parenting. Uh, but when it comes to video games, I mean, I'd go to my friend's house and I'm like, dude, like your kids have been like in front of their screens for hours and hours and hours, and you only see them come out for a snack and then they just go back in and they've been playing games all night, and that's
Hmm.
their entire summer vacation is just playing like, League of Legends. Um, you're not going to do anything about that, and to me, right, there seems some like lazy parenting there, like that there was a point where and I see my friends kids get fat.
Hmm.
I see them like lose on a lot of things that I would, let's say, think that I certainly would want for my kid, right?
Right.
And when I think of lazy parenting like that, I just think like parenting is hard, but there are certain responsibilities you've got,
Yeah, of course.
right? And that your kids play games, and the idea is that if you're too lazy to meet those responsibilities, you're just kind of letting them go. And it's the idea here is that it's not game companies, let's say, that are putting these kids in harm's way. It's you who are responsible for those kids. But
Hmm.
because you're not taking responsibility for yourself, right? You're the one that's really letting your kids get in harm's way.
Right, right. And it comes back down to protecting the kid too, right? Most of the
Right.
time when we think about this, we're thinking about parents letting their kids do things that is going to harm them either now or over a long period of time.
Right. Right. And the long period of time is easier
Right.
because it's easy to be lazy about your kid's habits because it's exhausting being a parent. And letting your kid do what you want to do is a very, very easy way to do it. Um,
Hmm. And it brings them joy, and so there's all these other things. It's like the kid's happy, you're happy.
the kid's happy. I'm happy. I just know that there's a potential downside to this, right? Or they can be, right?
Right.
Though I always kind of, when I hear people talk about lazy parenting with video games, I always kind of assume that they're not parents themselves,
Oh,
right? But it's more like you know how it sometimes feels like there's calls for game to be restricted in some way to protect the children, right? It's always
right.
we got to protect the children, but I'm not a kid, and why limit my fun? Why limit my freedom? Why can't parents just take care of their kids and take some responsibility for their kids' gaming habit, and then the problem would be solved?
Right. And I think also, here in the US, we are supremely liberal about the kinds of freedoms we allow parents to have over their children. We almost no rules about how to parent your child. And if anybody ever got a sense that somebody was trying to force parents to parent their child a certain way, there'd be a huge public outcry on that. And I think that's probably different in other cultures. Other cultures that have a little bit more of that sort of social network. We talked about this in one of the earlier episodes too, right?
Right. Though, yeah, though I'm not, the whole idea that the government would come in and tell you how to raise your child is also a pretty new idea, right? Like, who's the government to tell me how to raise, that the
Well, I
idea
mean,
that
they do
the
to a
children have
certain degree.
rights.
I
We
mean,
do now, right? But think about how novel an idea throughout history, right? The government coming in and telling you how you should raise your kids. Your kids were your property. You could sell your kids for most of history, right? I mean, you could put, now we have this idea that the kids are citizens and the government has a responsibility to protect, right, kids. And you see different countries trying to deal with this in different ways.
right.
One thing that from our discussion about China and South Korea when it comes to what they do about, let's say, excessive gaming, as you can say, in those countries, the government has an idea of how things should be done to protect kids and is supporting parents in doing that and also encouraging parents to do that.
Right.
I'm not sure how much it's forcing parents to do that. In a place like the U.S., you're more alone on this.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have, and this is true for most of the West, most of the world, right? Essentially, when it comes to kids and video games, you're mostly alone, especially where there's very little censorship, like the U.S.
Right.
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 So next, I was thinking about so as a parent, I want to share some of the challenges
Mm-hmm.
of parents protecting their kids, and again, I want to say this from a point as a parent. I see it differently than I did before I was a parent, and many parents have said similar things. So first of all, my God, there's so many different unfamiliar technology platforms and options.
Oh my gosh.
Right. I mean, in my house, right, we have the iPads, and we have the phones, and we have the Xbox, and we have the laptops,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think there's 4 or 5 operating systems or settings in each one of these. Right? And then there's platforms like Roblox or Minecraft, which I need to sign in completely, and I can never figure out the passwords because which computer they're in, and
Right.
which settings were for Minecraft and which were for Roblox and which was. I mean, there's just so, and my wife doesn't know how to do any of this. It's just me.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
If it was up to my wife,
Because when I think of the two of you, I think of her as being the more technically savvy one.
no, it's me. But yeah, notice, right? I mean, if it wasn't for me understanding this much, this would be even harder for her to do.
Right.
But just the fact that you got to learn all these different platforms,
Mhm.
right? And there's a learning curve for all these and there's some platforms that I set up and then I completely forget months later,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um,
Well, so on one hand, though, I mean, what's interesting about this is that kids learn these things faster than adults.
Way faster.
Way faster. Their brains are set up on a kid's brain is set in learn mode, and they're learning the rules for how to live in the world. They're learning the social rules, and that structure of the brain that's learning the social rules and learning how things are supposed to work gets applied very well to games and video games and learning rules.
Right,
Um,
right.
And so they're snapping this stuff up way faster than the parents are going to be able to keep up with them.
And they're motivated to understand it much more, and they're motivated also to look for loopholes.
And intrinsically
much better.
motivated. Intrinsically motivated. That is,
Oh,
it
yeah.
actually makes their brains feel good to learn stuff.
Sure, but they also got specific goals they want to play.
Right.
And this is what they need to play, and they have a strong desire to play, which is stronger than many parents' desire to keep them off play.
Mhm.
Right? And it's a major concern in their life to play. Where for a parent, this is one of many, 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 concerns.
Right.
So to me, that's kind of one. Too many platforms, and then new platforms, and then there's also things like there's not enough nuance in what can be controlled. So to give you an example, so my son uses his iPad during Zoom for school, or used it. School's just about over. And there were some games that he needed to actually use for school, which was awesome. Right? But the iPad would count them as games, not educational. So
And you couldn't change that setting on the.
no, because you can't. You can do it on the iPhone, but not on the iPad.
Oh, interesting.
You can't get granular enough. So, let's say I want him, there was this geography game that my son was into a couple years ago, which was just awesome. He learned, I was like, you play that as much as you want, but I don't want him on Roblox all day.
Right.
Right. And there was no way for me to kind of do that. So we kind of had a trust system where he's supposed to play this, but maybe that's not really what he's doing. Right.
And you're not hovering over his shoulder watching him 24/7.
I got 2 jobs.
Right.
My wife has, right. So, and this is kind of part of it also, right? It's already kind of, we're exhausted. If you're a working parent, I mean, God, I mean, we're talking about, 2 working parents in most households. You're working all day. You come back at home at 6. You've got all the things that you got to do. I mean, it's already exhausting before you get to any of this stuff.
Right.
Okay, and then you've got the whole issue that you're exhausted, and the number one conflict that lots of people have with their kids is the video games issue. So, okay, do you want to have that battle right now or not?
Right, because it's going to be a battle.
Because it's going to be, I mean, there's going to be crying involved. It's, and I mean, not always, right? I mean, so I don't want to excuse parents too easily here, right? I mean, you can set a line. You can figure out ways to do this, right? You can have a systematic way of doing this thing.
And again, kids gravitate to these sort of rule systems extremely well.
Right. So, you set up your rules, and the kid might cry in the beginning or might be very upset, but eventually might, accept that these are just kind of the rules, and that's how they do it in our house. And even though my friend gets twice the time that I get, right? And they get unlimited, money on Roblox. This is what I'm getting. It seems to me that some of these are valid and some of these are not valid. Right. Or
it's just so nuanced, right? I mean, every family is going to be slightly different.
Right. I mean, you think about just, in some sense, I want to say, look, there's only so many platforms I could keep track of. I mean, I got to keep track of all of my platforms and all of my passwords and all of my settings. Never mind, somebody else. I so wish there was some central way I could control all of my child's play. I could see how much money is being spent. I can see how much time. I can granularly decide what is in and what is out. If there was just one central way to do it, but we don't have anything like that.
No.
The closest thing we have is per OS, right?
Right.
But
right.
But even that is, as with the iPad, right, not good enough, right? And I don't know why
I guess it does. If you do have settings for per OS, then you know that your kid is at least getting up every 2 hours to change operating systems.
Right.
Get off the couch from the iPad, go to the desk where the PC is, play there for 2 hours, get up, go to find the iPhone and.
Right. So yeah, that's another. And mind you, my kid doesn't have a phone yet, right? And with the phone, Jesus, and a teenager with a phone, that's a big thing to deal down the road. It just seems really hard, and you also have this kind of variety of parenting, right? Where you have a variety of parents. There's plenty of kids in my son's school that don't have people that with two working parents. So you have a parent that
Right.
actually has time. And if they have time, maybe they do have the ability to kind of learn up on the stuff and to set the rules and to obey, go by the rules. And maybe a parent is educated enough to understand, is sophisticated enough with the technology to understand all the technology, but another parent isn't.
Right. Right.
And maybe
And
you have
that's probably likely, honestly. I think
Sure.
that ends up being the likely situation where one person understands it much better than the other. And because you divide and conquer, right? When you're in a team, like a parenting team,
right.
you
Right.
you divide and conquer. You say, all right, I'm going to deal with this issue.
Right.
You take that issue.
Right. Right. So let's say in this, my wife will be the talking of making the agreement with my son, but I'll figure out how to make the technology part happen. Right. But I was thinking more of like, different sets of parents, right? I got to imagine being like, a single parent.
Yeah.
And having to deal with this over everything else of being a single parent. So in other words, there's such a variety of parenting situations out there. And it seems to me that in some situations, the criticism is valid of, okay, you have the ability to do better and to protect your kids better. But in other situations, it's very understandable that the parent would not.
Right. And then you as part of that, there's an assumption that there is something there to protect them from. And it's not always clear that that's the case, right? 4 hours of video games per day may seem like a lot, but maybe it's not. Maybe there is no harm.
Which, by the way, is the additional research that parents are expected to stay on top of.
Right. So
Right.
one more thing on the parents' plate to do.
Right. So, for example, right, I believe, when we take a questionnaire, when we go to Kaiser, they ask how much screen time, and they want to make sure that your my child is 7. I think that they don't have more than an hour screen time a day or
Okay.
2 hours. Obviously, that, went by the wayside once Zoom came. But that's the idea. Let's say maximum amount of 2 hours, right?
Right.
Our son had 1 hour before, before Zoom came along. But notice, right? That's your pediatric recommendation. We assume that comes from good, psychology.
But it's going to be very conservative, right?
Yes, it's going to be conservative. And you also know that there might be a really big difference as your child grows up, and with the content of the games. I mean, they talk about screen time in general, right?
Right.
Rather than and this isn't about games; it's about staring at a screen. But
Right,
of course, staring at a screen is very different than interacting with a screen,
Right.
right? And the kind of thing that you can get from games could be much better than the kind of thing you can get from, let's say, watching TV, and maybe
Yeah.
lumping these things together is not a good idea.
Right. I'm a game designer, so I tend to believe that the mindless pointing and clicking of a game is better than the mindless staring of just watching television. That sort of somnambulist kind of state that you can see kids get into when they're just staring at the television screen.
Right, but of course, there's life lessons from the from the TV screen, right? There's connections that can be drawn. I'm thinking of my son's obsession with Harry Potter right now, right? And and how many things that we talk about, he immediately reframes in terms of Harry Potter world things.
Oh, nice.
Right? Because these are life lessons for him, right? And games could potentially do that. And games, again, right? So if you're like a sophisticated parent, you can go out and you can look at research and try to figure out what do psychologists say about this kind of game or this kind of game. But I mean, my God, there's so many kinds of games, and there's so many specific games, and unless you're a researcher specializing in this, there's only so much you can know. So
Right.
I want to ask you this, like, if game designers wanted to, if game companies wanted to, and I'm not saying they don't want to, I really don't know, What can they do to help parents here? And notice
Well,
we can talk about what they can do, and then we could talk about a separate question of whether they have responsibilities to do anything.
right. So I've been lucky in most of my career. The kids games that I've worked on have been with companies that care a lot about their kids. I mean, to the point where they will give up revenue in order to avoid potential harm for kids. And it's because they want to have, and the reason for it, I mean, the business reason for it is that they want to have lifelong fans. They're not willing to basically strip mine their market. They want to keep these people around forever. They're big companies with mouse ears that do this,
Okay.
and they care a lot about the kids, to the point of, like, anything that feels in the least bit predatory, they are not on board with it.
Right. So notice part of that is just the brand, right?
Well, right,
They're
sure,
just being on brand, right?
but that is the brand. The brand is caring
Right.
for children,
Right.
so that's on brand, right? And so
Right.
that's one thing that you could do, is you could make your brand about caring for your players, and caring for the kids who play your games. If you're making kids games, be the company that cares about kids.
What if that's not our brand? Our brand is more general, right? So I'm thinking, let's say, of obviously, Disney and Nintendo, right? Right, would be
Mhm.
another one here. What about
Nintendo, I also think, cares a lot about kids,
Yeah, right. I mean, that's
Mhm.
part of that's always been part of their brand,
right?
right? But what about if you're just let's say it's not part of your brand. You're a more uh, general game maker.
You might consider making it part of your brand.
Can you give an example of?
If you're making kids games and you don't care about kids, I feel like that's already ethically suspect.
Well, I care about. Let's say I care about kids having fun. But
Okay.
look, I mean, I could make kids shoes and not care about kids. I'm just making a product.
Again, it would be, if you didn't care about, like, how kids' feet grow, how they grow, like, if you're making shoes, you don't care about how they walk. If you don't have children's orthopedic people in your business, in your development chain, helping you design shoes for kids, then that's a problem. Don't you feel like that's a problem?
Well, it seems to me you're probably not going to make a very good shoe. Right. But I'm
Sure.
thinking, there's lots of pretty cheap shoes,
Mhm.
right? That are made, and you're going to have to obviously understand how to make a good kid's shoe.
Right,
and
and you could print, cartoon characters on them and whatever, and probably make them appealing to certain kids.
Sure. Right. But I could also imagine lots of, let's say, game companies that, they want kids to enjoy their game, but they want kids to enjoy their game so that they'll make, money off the game.
Right.
But it's
And immediate money, and not necessarily long-term money.
right, because I mean, you got the kid's attention right now. Who knows where the kid's going to go next, right? Their
Mhm.
attention shifts. I mean, look, brands like Nintendo and Disney are so rare in the way that they have these kind of lifelong fans that start with kids.
Right.
I mean, that's the exception, not the rule.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I want to bring in a little bit of history about television, because there was a period of time in U.S. television from 1946 to 1983 where making shows that were basically commercials for products for kids was illegal, and then that got thrown out. I think the Reagan administration took that away in 1983, and it became a free-for-all.
And that's still illegal in some countries, right?
Yes.
In most of Europe, I believe.
Most of the people that are going to be listening to this are people your age or younger who grew up, in the more laissez-faire period after 1983, and are going to look at themselves and go, well, I didn't turn out horrible, so it must be okay.
Right. Well, I mean, we can look at our materialist society and think about how commercial TV targeted at children might have played a role in that.
Right. And so this ties into the way games that are made for kids that have lots of in-app ad purchases. So we're talking about the harm that you talked about at the end,
Right.
the last harm, the financial harm. Marketing directly to kids through through their entertainment is perfectly legal.
Right.
And for everybody, what 27, 37 years or older, that's what it's been like your entire life, or 37 years or younger, I mean.
Sure. In the U.S., right? Though again, right? I mean, this is not the case in some parts of the world. Though it really makes me think another of the harm that I'm kind of concerned about is materialism, right? That materialism and in a game context, making sure you have the things you need to fit in. That games might support that and push that, right? So
Yeah.
right, if Fortnite, let's say, as we talked about before, let's say Fortnite might bring out new skins, thinking that I'm going to get socially shamed if I don't get one, and is this then promoting this idea that I got to get the latest thing in order to feel comfortable with myself and my position in society? And what does this teach kids?
Right.
Notice,
And
right?
there's-
That's another sort of issue.
Right. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of counter programming for that, right? There's not a lot of things telling children, hey, you don't necessarily need all that to fit in.
Sure. It, mind you, it not only goes against, let's say the bottom line, but it may go against their fiduciary responsibilities to make money for their stockholders.
Right. Well, I'm
Right.
thinking about there's after school specials and things like that used to be
Ah.
around to teach these sort of life lessons, to
Yeah.
be kind of a counter programming.
Now we have BTS. Well, let me then ask you this. I mean, the kind of problems I talked about
Mhm.
before that parents have, what do you think companies can do to
Mhm.
help parents with this?
Right. So one thing you can do is you can put parental controls in your games. It's maybe a little extra work for parents to go in and set them up. But if it's not system wide, like, Apple has some parenting controls for you. But if those are not adequate, then you can do it individually for each individual game, or maybe for all of your games. If you publish more than one game, if you have a slate of games that you publish, you could set up something that looks at them all and calculates, how much screen time, how much money is spent, and allows parents to put some limits on those sorts of things. That wouldn't be hard to do. There's an extra UI, and it does require parents to pay attention to these things so that they know that those features exist. And then that's the next question is how do you let people know that these features exist? How do you know when your kid gets a new app, what kind of parental control features exist in that app?
Right. And this is where in my dream world, all the big game company, all the big gaming platforms get together and
Mhm.
they agree on some sort of standard,
Mhm.
right? For this, that then, or, governments, help support this, let's say by enforcing the standard. I don't know, probably,
Right.
either let's say I'm just throwing out ideas, right?
Sure.
Is there a possibility for universal or standard, or are games just too different and you need kind of granular control for games? That what
Yeah,
might work
I
for
don't know.
Fortnite might not work for GTA.
Who would be in charge of enforcing it? Because there would be a giant advantage for anybody who said that they were agreeing to it and then not agree to it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is the same. Yeah, this is true for anything an industry does,
Mm-hmm.
right? So whenever an industry creates standards for itself and has certification processes and all that kind of stuff, it needs some sort of enforcement mechanism. Otherwise, governments end up dealing with these things,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Governments end up taking over, and usually no one really wants that.
Right. And to a certain degree, you could have these things so that you don't have to that they default to be on. So you default a game you load up a brand new game and it defaults to its most protective settings, and you have to use some sort of parental controls to get past them.
Notice even that is, yeah, sometimes that could be super annoying. Why can't my kid do this? I got to figure out the parental control. Though you're being safer, again,
Right.
whatever exactly safer means here, right?
Right.
But yeah, I just think the whole problem is it's a big. I hope people are working on this problem. I hope someone somewhere is
yeah, I
working on
think
this problem.
the business is so competitive. The conflict, the two forces that are fighting, as I see it, are the forces that because it's so competitive that you have to do everything you can to make money because it's so competitive. If you don't, your company goes under. You have to lay your employees off. There's all kinds of bad problems that come with that, right?
Right.
On the other hand, if you care about your people, if you care about your fans, you care about your players, you will make decisions that are in the best interests of your players. And I hope, and I'm always hopeful about this, and I'm always optimistic for this, that's the force that will win out in the competitive part, right? Is people will gravitate towards the games where they felt cared for. And those are the ones that will win in the marketplace, even though the other ones may have other advantages, have these other short-term advantages because they don't care.
Maybe, right? And I mean, that might be optimistic. I mean, it's definitely optimistic. I mean, there's a question.
It might
of
be
whether
unrealistically optimistic.
Right, right. It's interesting, what we do with kids and other kind of products that might harm them, right? So, notice, right, there's some products, and we can include games in that, where we just ban kids from buying those products,
Right.
like guns and alcohol, tobacco.
Yeah.
Though
Yeah.
the United States is, I think, unusual in that, for example, there's no, unless you're talking about pornography, right? There's no ban on buying any games. So you can buy the most violent game that you want if you're 5, if you could get the money, right?
Right. I mean, individual stores will look at the ESRB ratings and have some policies.
Right. Voluntary policies, if
Voluntary
they want
policies.
it. Right?
Right.
But let's say there's no laws about that, right? So it's imagine if this was the case with things like tobacco.
Right.
But of course, there's a really big difference between tobacco and video games.
Right.
Right. And that's a really, so notice, right, the tobacco harm is, real and large, and we treat that
Right.
differently
Well
than the
documented.
harm, and well documented. We treat it very
Right.
differently than the harm of video games.
Right. Strangely, if we want a good comparison between tobacco, the comparison to tobacco is probably sugar, where we know how harmful sugar is, and yet we don't do anything.
Right. Well, we, at least, there's attempts to educate parents about it, but, not from the government, let's say.
Like banning, not letting children buy sugar.
Right.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, though, how exactly would you do that? It's really hard. It's
How
in
would
everything.
you do it? How do you do it with tobacco? I mean, I guess, tobacco is not in everything, but
I mean,
sugar doesn't
tobacco
have to
is super, super regulated, right?
be. Mhm.
But then notice, right, sometimes we restrict what things could do by age or some sort of parental approval. And, this idea of limiting advertising that targets kids. To me, this is one of those things that, companies can certainly do. Like, right. So if it's part of parents' job to protect their kids from, let's say, financial harm, one thing that undermines that is companies using in-game advertising. And when I say in-game advertising, I mean kind of any kind of marketing in the game that would move the player, which may be a kid, to buy something. Again, part of the problem if you're the company is how do you know if the player is a kid? And
Right.
where you can give an adult options, but the kid won't know that it's an option. This is where South
That's
Korea
right.
solves this problem by having you have to log in with, a national ID.
Right.
That-
And it used to be true too that, you could tell what was made for kids versus what was made for adults, but now you can't because adults have adopted children's aesthetics as their own. So,
Yeah.
that sort of bright, colorful, cartoony aesthetic. I know plenty of people in their 40s who love that stuff.
Sure. Right. And I like that our world has become less stuffy and less quote unquote
Yeah.
adult and serious.
Right. You don't have to if you happen to like Hot Wheels,
Right.
as I do, I'm not shunned as an adult for liking a children's toy.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we've clearly progressed as a society. Right.
Right, but it's also opened us up to this these dangers, right?
Yeah.
Where you can't tell is this made for a kid or is it not
Right.
made for a kid?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I want to. So I have this thing that that I use in class, and I want to. So a tale of 4 game companies, and I kind of want to throw that into the mix. So okay, here are my 4. Have we ever? I don't think we've ever talked about this.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so here's the first one. Gimmicks markets a game to young children, that it will be used responsibly because of adequate protections provided by their parents or caretakers. But their parents or caretakers don't actually protect them, and the kids get harmed.
And Gimmicks knows this. This hypothetical company,
It
Gimmicks,
doesn't.
knows. Oh, it doesn't know.
It doesn't know it, right? It
Okay.
thinks that parents will protect kids, but they actually don't, and the kids do get harmed.
Okay.
Right? Here's the second one. So Swarm markets a similar game to kids, but it believes that the parents should protect them, but they probably won't. So they believe the kids will probably get harmed. Okay? A third company, I'm calling it Womb, markets. I do a side hustle thinking up video game company names. Markets a similar game to adults. But it's not targeting kids, it targets adults, but it believes that young kids will probably be harmed because they're going to get access to this game. Think about how what teenager does not have access to GTA 5, let's say. Right? Or any game when it comes to teenager, even
Of course.
lower than that, right? And assuming that the game is harmful, right? They think that they're not targeting kids, but they think the game will harm kids because, again, parents will not prevent their kids from playing it. And then you have Rapid, and Rapid they market a similar game to children, and they purposely try to make sure that parents can't protect their kids. So they try to kind of make, let's say, the parental controls confusing, or maybe hide them, or maybe not have parental controls. But they purposely try to undermine any protection that parents might give them. Okay, so notice we've got we've got a situation where, in some sense, parents fail in all of these. Look at the game companies themselves. Right? Do you think that Gimmicks does anything wrong? Right? So Gimmicks was the
Yes.
first one.
Yeah,
Right.
Gimmicks was the first one.
Yeah.
Gimmicks has this sort of naivete to them that I don't buy in the current age of how much knowledge people have about their apps. So they're pretending they don't know, but they know. So I literally don't buy it.
So let's say they genuinely don't know. Let's say they really are naive. But maybe you can say they're negligent here, that they
Yes.
should know.
Yeah, they should.
Right.
If they don't know, they should know. And if they are saying they don't know, they're probably lying.
Right? I mean, maybe
So I think pretty poorly of them.
right? Maybe they're like young developers, young indie developers, and they don't have kids and they haven't thought about kids, and right. So notice, right? You still might say, okay, they're negligent, right? People in this industry should have an idea by now that something like this is going to happen. Okay? Now, what about? So now look at Swarm, right? So Swarm is the one that they're like, look, it's parents' responsibility. Kids are going to get hurt, but that's not on us, right? It's on parents. Well, what do you think about that one?
I don't have a lot of respect for that because they know. Or they have a good probability that they know that they're going to harm children.
No, in this case, they believe that they're going to harm kids.
Well, probably harm.
Probably.
So I'm
Right.
I'm going to give that a 50+% chance, right? Because of the word probably.
Sure. Yeah. Let's say, let's
They
let's
don't know
put it
for
at
sure.
75.
They don't know for
Right.
sure that it's going to harm kids.
Right.
But it's probably going to harm kids.
Right.
But they're leaving it up to parents.
Right. They're saying
What's
if
not saying it doesn't
Right.
say here whether or not they're helping or hindering parents
neither one.
to understand that. So
Right.
they're just, I don't know that you can do neither, right?
Okay.
Depending on the feature, I'm not sure how you could do.
Yeah, it's interesting. Let's say they put in standard parental control. Well, I mean, so many games don't have any parental controls, so
Right,
it's
right.
not
They
like
don't
there's a
have any.
standard. So they don't put in any parental controls. They just kind of make the game, and they're like, yeah, if kids get hurt, which they might, that's the
Right.
parents' fault, and that's not on us.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. Right.
Uh,
So I feel honestly, at least they're not trying to tell me that they're naive about it.
Okay.
At least they're not trying to tell me that they don't know. So,
Yeah.
all right. So there's a little bit more honesty to them, I feel.
It's interesting because part of me, part of me likes that kind of view. Another part of me thinks that, look, they're just rationalizing the fact that they're harming kids,
Mhm.
and they're acting recklessly, right?
Mhm.
Telling them, oh yeah, it's just parents' fault,
Sure.
right?
Right. As
Without
opposed to Gimmicks, was also acting recklessly and just pretending not to know.
well, they were acting negligently.
Recklessly
If-
and negligently.
Well, recklessly. So the difference between the two is negligence is you should have known, right?
Okay.
Reckless is you knew but you did it anyway, right? That's the
Sure.
difference,
All right.
right?
Right.
And these are like legal designations and all that,
Okay.
right? Right. And that's kind of the idea. When you think of reckless, right? You've got a harmful product and you're like, yeah, let's release it anyway. We can make some money.
Right. It might not hurt anybody.
Right. It might not. Notice, right? And that could be a rationalization that you tell yourself,
Right.
right? Though, I mean, maybe it also could be that, look, you've already you went above and beyond. You're like, we installed these parental controls, we did all these things that parents can use, but parents are just not. We just don't think parents are just going to use them, but we did our part.
Right.
And I'm a lot more sympathetic to that, because I'm not really sure what to think about that. If that's the case, it just seems to me that there's a problem with the whole industry.
Yeah.
you
And they
know?
are marketing this to kids. They're
Yeah.
marketing this to kids, knowing that it's possible that these kids will be harmed.
And taking steps. In one version of this, right? In
Yeah.
one version, right? Let's say they took steps that to give parents the tools to protect the kids, but they still don't think that the parents will make use of them.
Right.
Right. So notice this could be, I think, this could be evil. This could be bad, less
Right.
bad, or maybe benign. Maybe it's fine, depending on maybe how much they do themselves. What about Womb? Right. So they're like your, same game, but you're marketing it to adults.
Right.
You're not marketing it to kids, but you think that kids will be hurt because parents aren't, protecting their kids.
So again, a step forward, because at least they're not actually marketing to the people that can be harmed by it.
Right.
So one step up, but not that much of a step up, because they're still not doing anything to prevent children from being harmed by their product.
Though I didn't say that, right? It's possible that they are doing something.
Sure.
They're just not doing. It's interesting, right? Whatever it is they're doing, it's not enough. And again, notice maybe they're not doing anything. Maybe they are doing something. Maybe they're doing a lot, but it's still going to end up hurting kids.
Right.
Right? At
Right,
what
sure.
point? So again, imagine a game like GTA. Let's say GTA hurts kids, which it doesn't hurt kids as far as I know, but I don't know.
Right. We don't know.
Right? I wouldn't want. I don't know what Rockstar could do to not get kids to play. I don't have a clue. I mean, and I certainly wouldn't want GTA gone because of this.
I think it comes down to there's a threshold of danger, right? We allow some things to be dangerous,
Right.
and we're fine with it. We're fine with things being somewhat dangerous, but there's a threshold to that, right? At some point, it
Right.
becomes too dangerous, and so figuring out the specifics of like what is the danger, what is the possibility of danger here is going to be, I think, important for understanding all four of these.
Yeah, and this is why, essentially the greater the harm and the greater the possibility of harm, the
Mhm.
more we seem to think that steps are necessary,
Right.
right?
Right.
So,
At what point do we put a handrail on a set of stairs?
right,
Right? 3
Right.
stairs? 5 stairs? 7
Right.
stairs?
I'm assuming that, I'm assuming that someone has actually studied this issue. This is like
I'm sure
someone
on stairs. I'm sure it
on
has
stairs specifically, right? Right, and in certain contexts, and your indoor stair might be different than an outdoor stair because of potential wetness and issues like that,
Mhm.
right? But notice, right? To me, obviously, if there's a bad guy here, it's the last one, right?
Mhm.
Rapid, and Rapid. This idea of I can't imagine any version of Rapid where you can excuse undermining the ability of parents to protect their kids.
Right. They're going out of their way to prevent parents from being able to protect their children.
Right. And notice, and you don't have to go very far for this. You can, you know, the nag factor in marketing,
Mhm.
right? The idea of, right, it's been around for a while now, right? The tactic of getting kids to nag for something for their
Right.
parents. So, right. So it's, you're, and this is something that is pretty big in marketing in general, right? Trying to turn that no, the parent's initial no, trying to get the kid to nag as much as possible till they turn that no into a yes,
Right.
right? And where products are placed in a supermarket, right, has things to do with that. The way commercials are designed might have something to do with that. So, mind you, this is not necessarily a video game thing at all. And I don't know of any video companies that actually do this,
No, I can't think of any.
right? But it's like I want to shake my fist at them, if any of them did do that.
Right. But without, I mean, so I just had a funny idea. What if there's a game that teaches you how to be a salesperson?
Okay,
There's a lot of sales jobs in this world,
right,
and it's good to teach kids a trade.
right.
So how about a video game that teaches kids to be a salesperson by teaching them these useful sales techniques like the nag?
Oh, I love it. I love
Is
it.
that an
Yes.
ethically good game, or is that an ethically horrible game?
It's an ethically complex game. Depends on how you do it. It's oh man, that would be a fun one for us to do an episode designing. I could think of a lot of different ways a game like that could go. Yeah, I mean, selling yourself. I'm also thinking of my like students and their need to sell themselves,
Hmm.
and how much
Yeah.
of their careers depends on selling themselves these days.
Yeah, or pitching projects or anything. I mean, how many pitch meetings have I gone into pitching games to people, higher up the chain from me? If I had a way, if I had knowledge about how to turn initial no's into yeses, I'd probably get a lot more games made.
Right. Man, this is like, a kid's life hack.
Hmm.
Okay, Andy. So let's wrap it up. What do you think we can conclude from our conversation today?
Parenting is hard, and it's certainly a complex issue, right? How much
Right.
of it is how much of this is the responsibility of the parents, and if there's any responsibility at all in the game companies, I tend to think that there is, but I also think that it's because that it's not only a good idea for their responsibility, but also good business in the long term to care for your players.
To me, what really kind of stuck out, beside the fact that I think it's really important to realize just the variety of parenting situation out there and how incredibly complicated this is from a parental point of view. But when you said that that first company was naive, that really stuck with me. right? This idea that, if companies think that parents are just going to be there, standing over kids and watching what they're doing and protecting them, that ain't going to happen. That's just not
Right.
realistic. And there's something negligent about, and this idea potentially rationalizing, right? That, parents will take care of this. It's, it's the parents' responsibility. I think at the end of the day, we're all kind of in this, where we're all kind of in the gaming ecosystem. We're all kind of in this social web where we're interacting together, and companies definitely have a role to play.
Yeah.
I'm not clear exactly what specifically that role would be, because I think it might depend on the kind of things that we talked about, right? How serious is the harm, right? What's the likelihood of that harm happening? How are parents aware of that harm? You would think that any company that thinks that their game might really harm kids would at least try to do something about that, right?
Right.
And I would hope the game industry as a whole, looks at stuff like this.
And not just as another opportunity to sell somebody.
Yes. Well, you sold me on that, Andy. Sorry, I couldn't resist that. All right. Good podcast, GP.
Good podcast.
Play nice, everyone.